Greetings, this is Jackson Snyder, and what you're about to hear is a secret personal interview with Robert Eisenman, the professor of Dead Sea Scrolls fame and author of many books on New Testament studies and Dead Sea Scrolls, recorded on April 30th, 2017, with interviewer Steve Tremble in Tulsa, Oklahoma. This recording has only come out now, as we have just obtained Professor Eisenman's permission to release it, and I'm recording on September 23rd, 2017. This is part 1, uncut and unedited.
I ain't insulting anyone to go to bed sooner or later, I think.
Wow.
What's up? Let's get on with it.
Let's do this.
Steve.
All right.
What's your profession?
I am a graphic artist, photographer, video.
My son's a photographer.
Yeah, I do.
And my other son does the video and everything, putting him online, everything for him and so on.
I do production work for...
So do you have a card?
Not on me. They're all in the truck, which I left. I took my wife's car, so...
Okay.
But I will get you anything you'd like on that.
Well, just send me something.
Sure.
Yeah?
Sure.
So here, I'll give you an email. If you can send me something.
All right.
I don't want to operate through him.
Yep.
Just send me your whatever about yourself.
Sounds good. Testing. Sounds good. I'm going to take these off so I can just talk normal with you.
Don't repeat it out loud. That's it.
I got you. All right. Oh, that's fine. This will be, I'm hoping for a 30-minute to 45-minute usable interview.
We'll see what happens. I'll tell you when I've had enough.
All right. And
I don't want to do much more than a half hour, that's for sure. But let's get up moving because it's getting dark.
This is April the 30th, 2017 at roughly 7:20 p.m. at Jeanette Koch's house. And Robert's been here for 3 days and talking and educating. And this is an interview through the Foundation for Hebraic Studies, through the goodness of Jackson Snyder. And we are talking today to Robert Eisenman, who has led a very adventurous life and seen most of the world and had a lot of interaction as he's an educator and has spent a lot of time with the Middle Eastern studies, both in religion and language. I am privileged and honored and grateful to have this opportunity. Feel free to say hello.
That's all right. I'm fine.
Okay.
I didn't think I had to need to respond.
Well, I'm just introducing you to the audience.
All right, that's your.
If you would give me your highlight reel in 5 to 10 minutes.
What highlight reel?
Of your life, of your personal life, the things that have stood out to you in a 5 to 10 minute context.
Well, a lot of things I'm not sure I feel like sharing with the world, but I will tell you some things which come to my mind. I can't give you, a blow for blow highlight reel that I'm sure is perfect or accurate or makes any sense. But I'm talking now. You don't have to say anything. I was born in New Jersey. And I grew up in a place called South Orange, New Jersey. And it's funny because I now live in Orange County, California. And it's funny the connection with Orange all the time, but people don't realize. They think that because a place is called Orange, oranges grow there or something like that. In fact, Orange County, California, which is fairly well known now because it's always considered a conservative place south of Los Angeles.
I lived there once.
Yeah. And I had never been there before I went there. But And I didn't know its reputation as being, it's not conservative anymore because so many people have moved in and so many people have moved further south, but it was about 20, 30 years ago considered a bastion of conservatism south of LA. That's named after the orange groves that once flourished there. I'm not sure how many still flourish there actually. I've never seen any in any place, but you can grow lemons and oranges in your backyard if you have a tree and you want to. I think we have a lemon tree in our backyard. I've been there 40 years, so I mean, I've been there quite a while. I spent the majority of my adult life there, really. But I was born in and grew up in a place called South Orange, New Jersey. Now, people don't realize that at one time, they forget that New York, of course, was owned by the Dutch. And therefore, that part of New Jersey would have the name Orange after the Duke of Orange. The Duke of Orange would be a Dutch name of some kind. I don't know how it actually got into this area of northern New Jersey, which is really a suburb of New York. But there's East Orange, West Orange, South Orange, Orange, and then there's Montclair, which was supposed to be North Orange, but turned into Montclair for some reason. I guess they didn't like the name North Orange. The thing, one of the famous astronauts actually comes from Montclair. Someone mentioned his name earlier, but it's already slipped my mind. But everyone knows who he is. One of the first ones up. You probably know who he was. But anyway, I think that's one of Montclair's only claim to fame. I mean, they say South Orange has a claim of fame of my brother, who's a pretty well-known architect, Peter Eisenman, who's the designer of the Holocaust Memorial in Berlin and Arizona Cardinals football stadium. And some architects who were here this weekend were quick to point out to me there's no one in the architecture field who doesn't know or hasn't heard of his name.
How much older is he than you?
I was going to get to that. He's 5 years older than me, and he went to Cornell, and because Cornell is a multi-department school campus, not like Harvard or Yale or Princeton or so on. It's got many more. It's more like a State University of New York situation. A hotel school, engineering school, every kind of thing you can think of there. He moved from arts and science and he discovered architecture and he went into architecture but he made a name for himself. I, myself, was never thinking of going there because I used to go up to visit him a lot, but I could have gotten into Harvard, Yale, Princeton, any of those schools. In some regards, it's always good for name recognition and snobism to have done that. But because he was there and I used to visit him a lot, and I think he really did want me to come there for some unknown reason. I don't know why. Because I don't think we're as close now as in the old days. But
is he still living?
Yeah, he's living. He's famous. I told you, he's still around. He's at Yale University. He's still teaching at 85 years old. There. So there's no problem with him. It's not like Cal State Long Beach where they shove you out to pasture as fast as they can, you know. He's got his own practice, his own office in New York. He's got everything he wants. He lives out in Connecticut. But the point is that he's most well known for the Holocaust Memorial in Berlin. But I went to Cornell because the opportunity arose of visiting him and going to speak to the people in engineering physics, which was a unique program at Cornell at that time, which was preparing people for nuclear physics. And I was very excited about Einstein and people like that. And Hans Bethe, the father of the hydrogen bomb, he was part of the program. And that really made it really important to me. And so I didn't know if that's what I wanted to study, but I went and spoke to the people, and they agreed to accept me early after my junior year if I just took a few additional math courses in summer somewhere. And then I did that, trigonometry or something else that I took, advanced algebra. And I went to Cornell in engineering physics, and I spent 2 years or so in engineering physics. And I had a roommate that lived out in Iowa who was in the same program, very smart guy, still functioning in Florida somewhere. And he invited me out. His mother knew some people out at Bendix Aviation. And I went out to Iowa, which I'd never been anywhere like that before. And I worked in this engineering enterprise called Bendix Aviation. They don't make airplanes, but they make airplane instruments and things. Mm-hmm. And I worked on fuel flow meters, as a matter of fact. But, it was a slide rule generation. Everyone walking around with slide rules. We weren't into computers yet. And I just didn't like it very, very much. I didn't like I thought the people they weren't bad, they were nice, but they were very, very dull and so on. I was living alone out there. And, I made some personal contacts of, like young ladies I met. In fact, I told some people here that I went out to see some relatives who lived in Des Moines and never been out there, who had a department store enterprise out there, and they put me in touch with some young people there just to entertain me. And I went to a local cafe and they put the jukebox on and they had Elvis Presley playing for the first time. And I never even heard of the guy, because at Cornell University, an Ivy League school, you'd never hear of an Elvis Presley in 1956. That would be unheard of. So, you're out in Iowa and Elvis Presley is king already, So it was really an interesting experience for me.
How did the Beatles, how did you meet the Beatles?
Oh, well before the Beatles, I'm afraid. But anyway, my kids, my uncle's kids were very interested in the Beatles. But, okay. So I, went back to Cornell after falling in love with some people, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and, said that this engineering isn't for me. It's too dull, slide rules and stuff. And I was quite enamored of some of my philosophy teachers, and I switched over into philosophy. And you could do that at Cornell. And I didn't have to make up a lot of stuff because the math counted and all that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. And I'd taken a lot of liberal electives, etc. And I was involved with a philosopher there called Max Black. He was a very well-known logical, positive sort of philosopher, and we became friends towards the end of that period. But for some reason, philosophy, actually, after a year or so of that, I didn't feel very. I'd already started writing, and I was reading James Joyce. A friend of mine in the early engineering period introduced me to D.H. Lawrence, and I started reading James Joyce, and I was reading, everyone I could get my hands on, but James Joyce was the biggest influence on me. And Portrait of the Artist Young Man, I'm sure I must have read that out in Iowa when I was alone in the room out there. Mm-hmm. And that was really mind-blowing. And I never got through Ulysses in the sense of feeling that it was a very sensible book, and I'm certainly not Finnegan's Wake. But Faulkner, you name them. D.H. Lawrence, I thought, was this fellow started me off by reading the short stories of D.H. Lawrence and so on. And I got into all that stuff, started reading Nietzsche and everything. And I thought, I have to go something more literary, and I went into comp lit. Mm-hmm. And they
your junior year or senior year?
My junior year, okay. Or in the middle of, somewhere in the middle. In Cornell, you could switch back.
Okay.
But after time in comp lit, it turned out I wouldn't be able to graduate in time with the kind of course I had. So, first when I switched into the arts and science school, I did it into physics. And then I moved over into philosophy, and then I moved over into comp lit. But you couldn't get out in the time I wanted to, so I switched back to philosophy in order to graduate in 4 years. I wanted to get out of there.
Right.
Well, I was writing.
What year did you graduate?
58.
58.
But I was already writing, and I was already writing since the Iowa experience that I had. And, I might have even been writing before that. And, I was basically writing almost full time aside from taking my courses. Mm-hmm. Basically semi-fictional autobiographical stuff and poetry and things. And, so I'd already gone that summer between my junior and senior years to Europe. Mm. We went around Europe with a friend of mine from the engineering school, a really fine fellow. I still am in contact with him. He's up in the Bay Area. And, his father was an investment banker from New York, so he was used to all that sort of stuff. We drove around Europe in a Citroën Deux Chevaux, which was quite an interesting experience. which we rented, and we went to. We went everywhere. We used to sort of race up and down the Pyrenees, and then into Spain, and then across into Italy, and then up into Austria. I fell in love for some reason. I think the Russians must have just pulled out of Vienna. It was so simple and so pleasant and so cheap at that time that I just loved it,
Was there still leftovers from World War II?
No, nothing. The Russians had gone, and it was just a really nice, but it was very pleasant. Now it's a very expensive city, I hear. But at that time, it was really a really pleasant sort of place. And I wanted to stay, and my friend actually wanted to stay too. And in fact, when we finally got time to go home, he did end up staying there. And he didn't come back that year, but he was from a much more prosperous background than I was from. In any case, he took the car back up to Paris, so I had to fly the rest of the way around Europe where I was going. So I flew into Berlin and saw the divided city and all that sort of thing. It was still divided at that time. And I went up to Copenhagen. I got one of these sort of KLM flights that went around over, because we'd come on a Dutch boat, so I turned my ticket in for a KLM pass sort of thing. And I went all over Europe, went up to Copenhagen, came down to Amsterdam, flew over to London, went up to Scotland, took a trip out to the Isle of Skye, and finally got back to Scottish Air Base of Prestwick in time to fly back to America. That was my European trip.
During your European trip?
That was a summer.
Did you enjoy the different language?
I just loved being in Europe for some reason. I don't know how did I enjoy it.
Did this start your love of language, maybe?
No.
Okay.
I don't love languages. I'm not good at languages, and I took a lot of French in high school, and I had to take German in college. I never really, those are tough things to master.
Sure.
If you're an engineering student, you got to take second. You have to take German, but French I got on top of somewhat, and so I wasn't in love with them, but I could deal with them. German I found easier, but French was easier to comprehend because my vocabulary was larger. Some of the words in German are difficult. So but I really loved Scotland, and, went out to Skye. I loved Oban, Fort William, all those lovely places, and, got to Prestwick in time to get home for my senior year. And then as I said, I had switched back into philosophy in order to graduate in time.
Right.
And I had this, writing urge and things like that I was doing. And, so in my lectures that year in Comp Lit, I encountered another professor besides Max Black in philosophy. His name was John Senior. He was a young guy, but really inspired, and he just knocked literature into your brain like nobody else could do. And he just was enamored of it. I think he ended up at the University of Iowa, actually. He passed away, I noticed from Wikipedia and so on some time back. But he ended up out in the Middle West. He was just a replacement professor at that time.
I see.
Famous professors there were Morris Bishop, who wrote The Life of F. Scott Fitzgerald. I forget he named it. A parody of one of the titles of his book. What's the name of Scott Fitzgerald's first book? Do you remember?
Oh, I'm sorry.
This Side of Paradise or something like that. I think he called it The Other Side of Paradise, something like that. Anyway, but he was a good fellow, and I got good friends with him, but he was not, he wasn't a very interesting professor like this senior fellow who was just a replacement person. He wasn't tenure, he wasn't anything, he wasn't even part-time, I don't think. Just a replacement guy.
Well, specifically, what was it with that?
But he just taught this complete course that was crazy. And the one thing that I do remember, I've always remembered from his course, and I even used it the other night when I was lecturing here, when people were asking me about the Gospels versus history or Paul's letters and things like that. I said, you have to remember, poetry is truer than history. Now, where he got that expression from, I don't know, but I always pick that up, and it's got, poetry is truer than history. The point is that what people have in their religion, particularly Christianity, is poetry, and they are in love with the poetry. But the history is not maybe what they really can understand. And so what we were arguing about in this particular lecture had to do with Paul's letters, which are historical in part, some of them. Romans, Galatians, 1 and 2 Corinthians, Philippians, a few others like that are, I'm not an expert on, I'm not the person who decides what are Pauline and what are actually Pauline, but you go through, 1 and 2 Corinthians, and you go through Galatians, and you see them, and you know that you're in an actual man's writing, and they reflect his spirit totally, and it is not very attractive, actually, if you come right down to it. I didn't realize these things until I taught these things at college after I'd finished my PhD in Islamic studies, no less. But the point was that this person said this thing, or the point I was making by using it, and I often use it, is that the Gospels are very attractive, but they are literature. They are not history. Whereas Paul's letters may not be so easily attractive, and they aren't, to my mind. In fact, they reveal a very jealous, a person who didn't like to be told what to do, who didn't obey the leadership's instructions, or rebellious, a person who was willing to say that, the law brings death, the law of Moses, which is an insult if you're Jewish. Jesus brings life. I mean, you could say what you want, but if you say the law brings death, you're certainly being insulted. That's why I brought it up that, poetry is truer than history. Or, for instance, something like, some people think they're so great, and they're, I only do what I don't have to take orders from them, and so on and so forth. He meant the super apostles like James, the brother of Jesus, but he mentions James, the brother of Jesus, in his letter. So I brought that up to show that the real history of Christianity is concealed in some of these letters. And like, if you look at Acts, and the Gospels are written in the third person, he, she, they, whatever. And the first part of Acts is written in the same way. But the first 15 chapters of Acts are written like that. But suddenly in Acts 16 or so, the narrative changes to the first person.
Right.
It's a different source. And the whole tenor of the narrative changes.
Right.
And you're in actually a more, I hate to use the word accurate or truthful. You're in a more accurate world. You don't have miracles and all sorts of disembodied spirits or all that kind of thing happening. You actually have, we went here, we went there, we did this, we stopped here, and that is accurate probably from a diary.
Right.
And not going into miraculous sort of,
I would like to save the Paul connection.
No,
for a little bit later.
Yeah, I'm not going to keep on that.
I just wanted to.
I thought I was the one who was giving. I thought I was hitting the highlights.
Hit the highlights of your personal influence.
I thought I was doing it.
I'm only suggesting.
No, I thought I was doing it. You're going to have to listen. I think you're going to have to sit back and listen, or I'll just cut off.
No,
okay?
You're doing fine.
Well, I don't need to be told that. I know what you want. I know what I'm doing, and actually telling me that puts me off it. So I wouldn't interrupt and tell me those things if you want me to be, answer your question properly. So, the point is that, I was just trying to illustrate why this professor's poetry is truer than history has meaning. It doesn't have meaning out in space. It has meaning within a context, and I gave a context. The point was that, I was quite impressed with that. Just to go back to this we document that you interrupted me in talking about, if you look at that where it interrupts, it's about James's instructions, and we didn't even know there was a James until that point to overseas communities. We thought the only James in Acts was had already been killed sometime, and then suddenly this other James appears. And then in Acts 21, you have this weird meeting in Jerusalem where Paul goes up with I guess it's Barnabas or someone like that, to Jerusalem, and he meets James, and the other James, weren't even introduced, don't even know who he is. And James says to Paul, but you see, Paul, we are all zealots for the law. What? This is a movement that are zealots? This is a zealot movement? Christianity is, James's movement, as you see. Well, we're not speaking about Paul. And then he goes on to say, but we've heard that you speak against the people, against the temple, and against the law everywhere in Asia. Which is true. We know that he does do this from the Book of Acts and then his own letters and things like that. And so to show there's no truth to these rumors that we've heard, we wanted to go into the temple and pay for a Nazarite oath, special particular oath that obviously Christians of the James kind, or if they call them Christians, I wouldn't call them that yet, were taking. And it's a very unique Jewish oath where you abstain from food and sexual intercourse and all other kinds of things for a lifetime, like Samson or one of these other people, or you don't cut your hair or anything like this. The Muslims still, after their pilgrimage, cut their hair. So they're still doing Nazarite things in Islam, They don't cut their hair during the pilgrimage period, obviously. So, we have 4 others here under oath, and they thought he would have money, you go in and show there's no truth and nothing loath. Paul does this when we know, in fact, he's doing just what James is saying. And he goes in, and the mob recognizes him, people from Asia, and they say, Jews, fellow citizens, and he brings a Gentile into the temple, and he says, this is in the we document. This is a different kind of material entirely than you get in the other sorts of documents that you have. This is the man teaching against our people, against the law, against the temple all over Asia. And he's mobbed, and they want to throw him out or even kill him. They throw him out and bar the door, And at that moment, the Roman troops who are up in the Antonia fortress see this. They've obviously been tipped off in advance to keep a lookout and watch and see the trouble and, expect trouble. And they come down and run down, obviously, and save him from the mob, and then force the mob to listen to him, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, while he gives a lecture on Jesus, his Christ. Well, the point is that I'm trying to make is there you have history, real history in a we document in the first person, and other things are literature. People don't like to hear that. They like the poetry and the beautiful literature, and that's what makes the thing so attractive. So what this professor told me at Cornell made a really deep impression on me, and not that it informed my whole life, but I'm showing what a good professor can do for you. And his name was John Senior, and he was a really, I don't know what ever it became of. I think he wrote a book called Up the Down Staircase or something like that. I can't remember whatever book. Anyway, I didn't follow him, but he's passed away, poor fellow, and I honor his memory and I hold him in high regard. So I was going to go to Europe after that. I was James Joyce. I was Portrait of the Artist as a young man.
Nice.
I was not going to be engineer. I was not going to go into my father's business. I was not going to. I had applied to graduate school. In fact, I had applied to Berkeley and in Comp Lit. And I had been accepted, but I put it off. I put it off for a year in order to go to Europe. And I went to Europe. I don't know if I knew I was accepted or not, but whether my mother wrote me or what. And I took that trip around Europe that I described earlier tonight, but I can just quick say that we were. Well, did I tell you already about the trip?
Well, you did, but we didn't have it on.
Okay.
Just real quick.
I took that trip to Europe with this a fellow student from engineering whom I knew very well, but who was from a more prosperous family than myself. Didn't we mention Vienna, or we didn't have it turned on at that point? I think I did mention when I said
briefly.
Yeah, so I think I mentioned the trip. That was the trip that I already mentioned, and that I ended up in, going out to Skye and so on and so forth. No. That was a summer trip. I'm confused now. No. I'm sorry. I went back to Europe now to go back to Vienna.
Is this second trip?
No, yeah, that was a summer trip. So this was not with this guy. I'm getting them mixed. Now I was determined, but I couldn't go because the Vietnam War was either on or about to be on, or everyone had to, without getting excused by my draft board. You couldn't just go off because you needed some release from your draft board. And I had not been, Cornell's an ROTC school, and this guy I'd gone around Europe with went on to be a Navy officer. My brother went on to be an Army, went to Fort Sill, Oklahoma, and became an artillery officer. He went to Korea and stuff, and he wasn't fighting in Korea. The war was already over when he went. But, you had to get a release. So I had to wait around home that summer until I got a release from my draft board, which I did. And then I went off, and I was going to go. I thought I'd met some people. I had met some people, whether on the boat or wherever, who told me, of a really nice town in the Austrian mountains, quiet town where. No, I guess it wasn't on the boat. Anyway, I think I'm trying to get it straight in my mind. Some people told me about a quiet place on the Greek islands to go. I was enamored of Greece at that time because of literature, Homer, the Greek tragedies. I loved Aeschylus and Sophocles and all these kind of people. And I was going to go to the Greek islands, and I also wanted to go to Vienna. So I don't remember if I stopped in Paris or anything like that, but probably did. But somehow I was in Paris for a week or two. I can't remember what happened. But I did go down to this, on the boat going over, someone told me about a town in the Austrian no, it was in Paris. I remember now. I was at a very famous cafe where a lot of folk singers sang, called the Contrescarpe, in the Place Contrescarpe in Paris. And was sitting at a table with some people who know Austria well and knew the Habsburg even family. And this was one of the Habsburg dukes who lived in this town in Austria, and said, go to this town, nobody will be there at this time of the year, it's not a ski town, and it's past summertime, and it'll be very beautiful and very quiet. And I did go to the town that they sent me to, and I was riding there up in the mountains of Austria. Meanwhile, one of the young ladies that I had thought I was in love with, that I describe in this book, The New Jerusalem, I had gone to the Paris Conservatory, so that was already tugging at me as well. Always going back and forth to Paris because of that. Anyway, I went up to the Austrian mountains. And she and her father, who was Austrian and had come to America, and she was born in Brooklyn, of all places, had promised to come visit me, but they never did. And after a month or so up in the mountains, I got tired of being by myself, though it was a lovely town. And I did meet this duke, this duke, whether it was Habsburg or one of those sort of family related to the Habsburgs. Forget what he was called, but I should remember, but it's disappearing. I did then go down to Austria and Vienna, and I did live there for a while. I made some very good friends down there, one of whom I'm still friends with, who writes for some Die Welt, a very well-known German newspaper. His name is Dieter Buhl, B-U-H-L. And I also met the woman who he was going out with a young lady called Monica von Holtzbrink, and the von Holtzbrink empire is a press empire now in Germany. And she's the head of it, people like that to have met, and that was his girlfriend, etc. I think he ended up working for her, as I recall, but I don't want to state any untruths. I can't remember everything precisely, but it was a really good scene in Vienna. And as I said, you could live very cheaply still. You wouldn't pay over $1 a night for a room.
Wow.
No, you wouldn't pay over $1 a night for a room. Even in Paris, you wouldn't pay over $1 a night. On the left bank, on the right bank, you might pay $5 or $10 or $20, but not on the left bank. And I had a room for easily probably less than $1 a night, and this other friend that I met was on the same corridor of this hotel living pension type place, and that's how we got to be friends. And then all the people that he knew there, etc. So finally, when this young lady and her father never showed up, and I was writing in my room all the time, I still got 3,000 pages of unedited material I wrote in this whole period when I was on the road. I'm still going to edit that material and get the novel out of it that I was writing. It certainly is a 3-part novel that that is going to come out of it. I know that I've got 3 different versions of it, and it's got 3 different heroes, and so I'm not into the archaeological field yet. So I go to the Greek islands, and then I hear about my acceptance at Berkeley or whatever. I'd already heard about it. I can't remember if I'd had been put off or what happened, whatever. But anyway, around January of the next year, this is basically 59.
Okay.
And I had gone to Idra. Idra was a great place. What's his name? Cohen hadn't even heard of Idra yet, and everyone was there. But as I mentioned to some of these other people earlier, and I think you were listening.
Yes.
I bumped into Mariana Jensen, she was called, and she just died this year, and Cohen died this year.
Yes.
He wrote her a little note at the time of her death, on her deathbed.
Wow.
He took her as a lover, and I'm not sure if they had a kid or not. I can't remember, but ultimately she had a kid by someone that I bumped into when I was on an Israeli speaking tour of Scandinavia many years later, and I saw them in Oslo.
Oh, wow.
And she wasn't with Cohen at that time anymore, but she had a kid by someone, and I think it was by her original husband, who did come over to see me. He's a lovely fellow. I mean, I didn't like Leonard Cohen as a person, as a human being. I had already been introduced to Leonard Cohen from my roommate, not my roommate, but a classmate in my fraternity who was 1 year below me that I had rushed, who I liked very much. His name was Lion Cohen. He was from Montreal. And he said, "Do you know my cousin?" Because he knew I was writing Leonard Cohen, Oh, wow. He's a poet at McGill, you should read his stuff. And I said, "Oh, okay, good. I hope someday." I looked at his stuff. I didn't know he hadn't become a singer yet. He was just a poet. And his poetry wasn't something that really attracted me very much, so I wasn't very interested in it. And anyway, on Idra, there was a lot of expatriates there. I mean, a lot, 10 or 15. Mm-hmm. And again, the rooms were less than $1 a night. And the whole scene took place in a hardware store there. In the back room where people drank Retsina, and so I was introduced to Retsina wine at that time. Mm. And as I said, the nicest people to me were very hospitable. Her husband at that time was called Axel Jensen, and he still is alive, I think. He was last time I heard. Mm-hmm. He may have passed away too, or he probably has passed away too, but he had become the national either poet or writer of Norway. And she had married him, and he had brought her to Idra. So they were Axel and Mariana Jensen. That's who they were.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
And I think it was Mariana, as a matter of fact, not Mariana, as Leonard puts it in his song, the famous song, "So Long, Marianne." Mm-hmm. Do you know the words?
I don't know the words.
It's time to say goodbye, yes. Blah, 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 and so on. So by the time I saw her again many years later when I was on an Israeli talking to her, he wasn't around, but there was a young lad there who was growing up. I don't know. I think it was... it could have been his or it could have been Axel's. I have no idea whose it was.
Okay.
I can't remember. I probably at that time knew. Anyway, she was really nice to me, that's all. But I respected a married person's status, and I felt that there was something available there, but I was still a young man, younger than Leonard for sure, and I just didn't feel I should reach out or do anything like that. She was a beautiful young lady, a really beautiful young lady. So anyway, then the Berkeley thing came through, and I left Idra, went back up, and did finally see this young lady in Paris that I thought I was in love with, but things were not going so well. And in that front, her father was very angry that that I was around. He thought that I was distracting her from her piano. She was a pianist, and wow. I talked to her into studying at the Paris Conservatoire of Music. So he was very angry that I was around, and blah blah blah. So but she was frightened of him, and so on and so forth. But finally, we did connect up a bit before I left, and then I took off and came back to America. And I had met some people again on the boat. A very nice fellow, very crippled man who was a hunchback and a very nice guy. And he had some property out in Cape Cod. And he offered to let me stay out in his property in the wintertime because there's nobody out there. And So I went up there to his property and did some more writing for a couple of months. Yeah, this was part of this novel I was working on. And then I took off for across the country in Greyhound bus to come to California, where I'd never been. Not flying, Greyhound busted across the country, up through Los Angeles, up to Berkeley, ended up in San Francisco. And I remember I walked from the bus station up what was called Nob Hill at that time, fancy place, and then on my way down and up to Russian Hill, which was up above where the Beatnik area was. It wasn't called the Beatnik area at that time. It was just called North Beach, which was really this more intellectual part of San Francisco at that time. San Francisco hadn't turned beatniks. The beatniks weren't in control of things or anything like that yet, though they were getting known. I mean, On the Road had already been published, Kerouac's On the Road and things like that. And I was aware of it, I was on the road. I knew this kind of stuff. And the funny thing happened as I walked up Russian Hill, I saw a rooming house. And I said, rooms for rent, at the very top of Russian Hill. It was beautiful, and $7 a week.
Wow.
So I took a room there while I was waiting for the class at Berkeley to begin that summer. And it was always writing, continue my writing. It would go down to North Beach a bit, go to the different cafes there and so on and so forth. And then I went down to Carmel and once again found a room, $7 a week at Carmel, California, which today you'd probably pay $100 a week or something like that. Yeah. Anyway, and things were really easy in those days. And so when it came time to register at Berkeley, I went over the Bay and, tried to sort of get into it. And something hit me, something like, just wasn't, something changed inside. And I sit in a big armory sort of registration hall. And everyone, it isn't the Berkeley that you imagine now, hippies and beatniks and all that kind of stuff, right. Lefties and everything. It was California personified. Bermuda shorts, bobby socks, all that kind of stuff. Stuff that I thought I'd left behind long ago at Cornell, because I'd been in the fraternity world and I had had enough of that, and so on and so forth. And I said, I can't do this again. Bermuda shorts, bobby socks, sneakers, all these, this isn't it's not the world that Berkeley represents after the free speech movement. It's Berkeley of, upper middle class snobbish California. And I was on for registration and the weirdest thing happened. I ripped up my card for registration and threw them in the wastebasket and said, right. I'm going back to Paris. And I hitchhiked across the country in 5 days and 6 nights and 5 days. Wow. And when I was living in this rooming house that summer up on Russian Hill, I had met this woman who lived down below in a garden, and she used to sit on her porch playing the guitar or something like that. She was a very wonderful woman. She had an eye patch. I think she had lost an eye. I forget why. She had been married to a pilot in the Second World War. She was a very fine woman. And one thing led to another in our conversations, and she invited me to come and live in her house while I was in San Francisco there. And I moved out of the rooming house and went down and lived in her house. Met some really interesting people, and she's the one who drove me to the airport, drove me to the Greyhound bus terminal. I wasn't going to hitchhike out of San Francisco. That's impossible. So I took a bus out to the middle of, I guess somewhere out in the middle of Nevada, like Elko, Nevada, or someplace out where, you'd be on the road where you wouldn't have to, worry about towns, and
You're beyond the Sierra Nevadas and
you're out there on the way back east. And I was not going to charge my parents for this excursion that I had messed about. So I did hitchhike, and I got some really funny rides, and I think I've written it up somewhere, but I got some funny experiences hitchhiking across America all night and all day. I never stopped anywhere to sleep. I slept in cars where people, I did make it in 6 days.
Wow.
And I went back, I did tell my parents what I was going to do. I was going to go back to Europe and keep on writing. And this time I did go back to Paris. And I went to Paris and got a room. And then it turned out that this young lady that, I guess she wasn't there that previous time I said, she'd only come because she'd finished at college at that time. Under my recommendation, she went to the Paris Conservatory of Music and not some other place.
And you had already graduated at this time, or not graduated?
Oh yeah, I'd graduated.
Okay.
I had graduated a year before, and I think she was. She didn't graduate because she wanted to move to music. She was going to go to the New England Conservatory, and then this famous pianist Robert Casada-Sue had heard her and invited her to come to the Paris Conservatory. And she'd asked me, I had already decided to go to Paris, nothing to do with her. Actually, and by recommending to her to go to Paris, I ruined my ability to stay in Paris because her father objected to my being there.
Right.
And that screwed it all up. But she wasn't there when I got there, and I should never have interfered in her affairs, and that was stupid. But, when people tell you what you do, if you ask me to go to the Paris Conservatory or go to the New England Conservatory of Music, I'd say go to the Paris Conservatory.
Right.
So that's how that occurred. Got back to Paris and got us some rooms in some cheap areas up in the Latin Quarter, in the Odeon district. And the big cafe in Paris at that time was the Monaco Cafe. And it was right around from the Odeon metro stop, halfway between Saint-Germain and Saint-Michel on the boulevard. I guess that was the boulevard Saint-Germain, that was called. But it was about, you could walk to Saint-Germain, the Sartre area, in about 8 minutes, and you could walk to Saint-Michel in about 5 minutes. These metro stops weren't very far apart. But Odeon, nobody really knew it very, very well, and I had got a hotel up this place called Rue Monsieur le Prince. It had a lot of Vietnamese restaurants on it, and so on.
Is this your third or fourth time in Paris?
This is my third.
Third time.
Yeah, and I got a fairly cheap hotel, a place called the Grand Hotel de Balcon, and it was, again, another, $7 a week or something like that. And I never spent more than that at that time. And so I tried to keep it cheap, because my parents were helping me a bit, and
They were supportive, obviously.
Well, $200 a month was no big deal for them. I think that's all it was costing me to live.
Right.
$200 a month, I think, most people could afford to give their kid to get him started in doing what he wanted to do. So the problem is this young lady came and it caused trouble with her father, and I really, found her a room, and that angered him and stuff like that. And I didn't really want to get involved in this thing. And she was complaining because she was supposed to be practicing and she was a worry wart and all this kind of stuff. And, I thought I probably had to take off at some point.
Right.
And I don't know if this is too detailed.
No, you're doing great. Keep it up.
So, the point is that I told you that I liked Vienna a lot on my summer trip. So some people, that's when I met these people at the Contrescarpe, I guess, at this point, not the previous one.
Right.
It's confusing.
Right.
And they told me about this town in the Austrian mountains and gave me the letter or gave me the name of this Duke or whoever he was, this Habsburg noble who lived in this town. In any event, it's getting a little bit unclear at the moment, I guess, in my brain what is going on. I'm not sure. But the point is that I also met my future wife at this time. At the Monaco Cafe, she had come from England. And she was just an 18-year-old young lady. And she was a beautiful, beautiful young lady and very civilized, very good family. And it turned out that, she was from later on, Michael Bajan and Richard Lee wrote a book with me called The Dead Sea Scroll Deception. And they had written a book called Holy Blood, Holy Grail earlier with a guy called Henry Lincoln. Holy Blood, Holy Grail was a real bestseller and made, a huge impact on people and made the city of Rennes-le-Château in southern France famous, and the whole Mary Magdalene cult started from that, and all this kind of stuff.
Wow.
Yeah, and so Dan Brown ripped them off in the Da Vinci Code. And, not ripped them off, but, used their book as the inspiration for his Da Vinci Code.
Did you feel like there was validity in the original books?
Well, let me finish.
Okay.
I can't judge that field at all. I don't want to judge it. I don't want to judge Dan Brown or anyone else.
Okay.
But the point of the matter is, they ended up suing Dan Brown, but the Henry Lincoln, who was with them in the Holy Blood, Holy Grail, whose idea it was, didn't. He was smart enough to stay out of it, and it didn't to get involved in the suit, which they lost, and ruined their lives, destroyed them, and ultimately caused their deaths.
This is Jackson Snyder, and this is the end of part 1 of the secret interview with Robert Eisenman.